Welcome to Unmute Yourself. I'm your host, Jennifer Carter, and I am so glad you're here. This podcast is about lifting the curtain on leadership, purpose, and the real stories behind people who dared to do things differently. We'll talk about how they found their path, the struggles they faced, and how they built something that truly matters. These are everyday people doing extraordinary things, and I want you to know you are capable of that too. So last season, we told the truth about what it actually takes to lead and stay whole in a world that rewards performance over humanity. And once you tell the truth, there is no going back. So season 3 isn't about being louder, it's about being truer. This season is about what happens when you stop performing and start living as who you actually are. So to kick off season 3, my guest today is Andrea Cilliers, a global disability inclusion strategist whose work spans federal government, international diplomacy, behavioral economics, and corporate consulting. Andrea began her career in discrimination and equal employment law, eventually working with the U.S. State Department advancing foreign policy through the lens of disability rights. She has advised governments, ministries, and global brands, from shaping policy for Ukrainian refugees to consulting with corporations like Microsoft on authentic representation and economic inclusion. But what makes Andrea's voice powerful isn't just her resume. It's her lived experience. Growing up with a disability in small-town Wisconsin, she saw firsthand how subtle and systemic ableism can be, and how often people with disabilities are expected to be exceptional just to be allowed in the room. Today, Andrea challenges the inspiration porn narrative and asks a radical question. What if people with disabilities were allowed to just be? And what if we stopped trying to fix individuals and instead redesigned systems? Andrea, I am so excited for this conversation. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was just such a wonderful introduction to hear that. You captured that so well. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here. It's always interesting to me when people hear their own introductions. It's like, oh my gosh, I do all of that. And I have done all of that.
Yeah, let the imposter syndrome sink in a little bit.
Right.
No,
No,
I'm
get rid of
totally
that.
kidding.
Right. So I love your story. And you've said your disability wasn't always front and center growing up. And so when did you start seeing how differently people were treated?
I would say from a very personal lens, you feel it when you're younger, but you try to ignore it because you always want to fit in. And then I think when you start to get comfortable in your skin, for me, it was probably in college when I left my small town and went to the big city of Chicago that I really felt comfortable standing out and then sort of embracing my disabled identity. But I think you always are aware of, people looking at you or people talking about you a little differently than your peers. Yeah, there's always that feeling of a little bit of shame or just a little bit of awkwardness or embarrassment. And then hopefully for many people, like I was able to work through that and then begin to embrace the parts of me that they hadn't embraced really the rest of my life.
Did it happen? I love that. Did it happen all at once, or did you find that it gradually happened over time?
There were definitely moments of, I could say there was a distinct turn in a positive direction, whether that's just like, having these feelings of freedom and feeling like I can't care anymore about how I look in a situation, or I really like who I am. And so why would I care if someone else doesn't, think of me the way that I think of myself? But then I definitely think there's other little moments that happen over time. And then you kind of look back and you can connect the dots. But when you're in it, you don't necessarily realize your growth. But now looking back, I've been able to really see those catalytic moments where I sense that shift. And of course, I'm still trying to figure that out as I navigate, where I am now in life. But yeah, you're always kind of like plotting these little points. So then you have the gift to look back and see the growth that you've been able to have.
Speaking of growth, your career blows my mind. When I look at what you've worked on, accomplished, been involved in, I love to hear how people got to those points and their career paths. And I know that when you were first starting out, right, you had dreams of diplomacy and you
Mhm.
even studied Japanese and Chinese, right?
That's right.
So did you always see your path as global? And how did you have the confidence to step into such a large, impactful career path?
I would say yes. I always thought that I would go global. Like, I always wanted to leave my small town and see the world. I studied Japanese starting in 7th grade, which I was just really fortunate that they had Japanese at, a a small town school in
Right.
Wisconsin. But I always joked that my dream job at that age was to be the US ambassador to Japan. And then kind of, consciously but also subconsciously worked towards that and was able to, meet people who had worked in those, roles or worked with the ambassador to Japan. And that definitely was not intentional, but very, for me, I think it's serendipitous that I was probably always working towards that in everything that I did. Though, if I could go back and tell my younger self where I would be now, I don't know if I would believe it, but I'm
Hey,
so glad that obviously my journey has been a windy one, but it's led me to the experiences that I've had.
it's so cool to me because even as a young person, it seems like you knew where you wanted to go, you knew
Yep.
what you wanted to do. And it also sounds like you truly trusted that those things would happen for you
Yeah.
without a doubt. So
Yeah,
you actually you started your career working in discrimination and equal opportunity, correct?
that's right.
Okay, so what patterns did you see in how harassment and
Mm.
bias actually show up?
Yeah, I was so young. I was just right out of college and I had, studied international relations and Japanese and Chinese. But when you have sort of a liberal arts degree, you don't necessarily have an immediate job that presents itself. Many go into the foreign service or have an international career. But for me, the next step was a job in the federal government. And I thought discrimination, equal employment opportunity was a really interesting field. So, not having a ton of work experience, I studied it. And I was obviously really good at understanding the history and the laws and all of the processes that are in place if an employee feels discriminated against in the workplace. But you don't realize until you really break it down or you talk with people who have felt discriminated against or felt harassed or bullied that it's behavior. It's just individual behavior. It can show up in the form of I didn't get a job or I was, counseled for my performance or I lost my job and I think it's because of my, fill in the blank. And so through the course of those many discussions and just really getting to see, I think, the impact and the toll that it took on people's lives, through that work, I realized that, it's pervasive. It happens to people at all levels. No one goes to work, hoping or expecting for that to happen to them. And it's devastating. And so, I always say, fortunately, that I had that experience really early on in my career because it gave me the tools as I got a little bit more senior or, I eventually changed and joined the State Department, that I had a sense of what that behavior looked like. And then, of course, seeing it on the global stage or seeing it, in a different organization, I was still able to understand the ways that it rears its ugly head. And that, unfortunately, no matter how smart you are, how talented you are, how senior you get, it's something that, a lot of people have experienced and a lot of people don't necessarily have the tools to deal with it. And so that's, I think, where it can be pretty devastating.
Right. And it makes me wonder, I hear this a lot from clients, like what can we actually do about it? And why do you think so many systems fail to
Well,
protect folks from this discriminatory behavior, even when intentions are good?
yeah, it's challenging because it's so personal. And I oftentimes had conversations with people where I just always had to gauge what their experience was, with coming forward and sharing their story, with where they were in their career and if they wanted to do something about it. We had to, really work through the culture at both organizations where I work to sort of say if that employee has seen other people come forward and saw the results that happened to another person, does that create the environment for them to want to come forward, even if the stories are different and their situation is different? I think everyone's always looking around for some sort of barometer to say, what would happen to me? Is anyone speaking out about this? And again, it's no matter how smart people are and how open they are about a range of other topics when something so personal happens to you, it's really challenging. I often say that it's easier to advocate for someone else and be a fierce supporter of someone else coming forward than it is to come forward for your own situation. And then, yeah, I think you said it correctly. Like the systems themselves are designed in a way to just move forward with work and business as usual. And they don't have time, the systems don't have time to stop when there's interpersonal challenges. I think about, a really busy embassy. And there are people who work, tirelessly. Let's say there's a big, big visit coming from DC. There's no time to sort of stop and check in and see how people are feeling. And people talk, really direct to one another, and feelings get hurt. And those are just very simple interactions. But over time, again, people can sort of look to say, I don't feel comfortable voicing any sort of potential weakness. Or if I voice my feelings or thoughts, is someone else going to look at me and say that I'm not, a good officer, a good employee?
Right.
And then, again, that kind of compounds and creates environments where, yeah, we can talk all day long about people bringing their authentic selves forward, but when people see how it's treated, when kind of come and speak your truth, sadly, the systems just continue to fail.
Holy cow. It's hitting so close to home, Andrea. Like
Oh,
you're saying it so well. And I know so many people who've experienced that, myself included.
yeah.
And so thank you so much for naming it so well. Something else that you taught me the last time we spoke was about behavioral economics, which
Yeah,
I had no idea what it was. And that's a field that you moved into, right? So
that's
can
right.
you just explain to the listeners what that means?
Yeah, yeah. The field of behavioral economics, the way I like to very simply explain it is just traditional economics always talks about the markets being rational. And psychology obviously talks about the complexities of human beings. And behavioral economics sort of combines the two fields and says, look, the markets are driven by human behavior, and human behavior is often not rational. So we actually need to look at how we can design systems so that they account for the many complexities and irrationalities of people. So I know that can kind of be a little kind of hard to really understand what that means. And there's a lot of different theories within behavioral economics that I think are really easy for most people to understand. My favorite is the nudge theory, which essentially is like, how do we design a system so that we can nudge behavior within choice architecture, so that people make enough of the right choices or good choices that we want them to make? And then how can we create a system to nudge people away from the bad behavior or the behavior that we don't want them to make? And, it's not about sort of big brother saying, do this, don't do this, but it's by designing the systems in a way so that people can make the right decision easier, and making the wrong decisions are harder.
Can you give an example? I'm thinking through for our listeners of how they can think as leaders to design things that demonstrate exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. My
Okay.
favorite example is the donor on your license, like to become a organ donor. So, for the longest time, a lot of governments grappled with this idea of, people don't necessarily want to give their permission to donate their organs when they die, because there was a little bit of consternation. What did that mean? But then there was more of an education where I think more people realized you can save lives, and this is actually a really great thing. And so governments looked and sort of said, well, we're not getting enough people who are signing up for this. Like, how do we get interest? And so a really famous behavioral economist, Richard Thayer, said, well, why don't we have the opt out feature? Meaning the default is everyone is signed up for it, but we very clearly explain that if you don't want to do this, then you can opt out of it. Just that process being easier to opt in and have that be the default. People didn't have to do extra work. We made it easy. And then, of course, people who had really strong feelings about it could opt out, and of course, no consequence. So for anyone designing systems or programs, I think it's really about figuring out how to make decisions as easy as possible. Everyone's overtaxed. Everyone has emotional load. The easiest way you can sort of help people is by creating a system so that it's either a default to choose the option that people don't want to go with, but have some sort of default or have some sort of process where, people don't have to go through this laborious effort to do the things that would serve them well.
Okay, I love this so much. So, if we take everything that you described with behavioral economics and nudge theory and everything that you know about disability inclusion and public policy, if you were designing the perfect inclusion framework for a company today,
Ooh,
ooh, I know. What would it include beyond hiring numbers? No
yeah.
pressure. Big question.
Yeah, no, it's a great one and something that I think a lot of companies are grappling with. The system should be designed on the premise that employees with disabilities add value to the company, that it's not a favor, it's not, a charity, it's not the right thing to do, it's not complying with the law, but the basic premise that, we want employees with disabilities because they have, skill sets, contributions, they add value to the company, and the bottom line or the organization's mission. They support that directly. And for me, that's the foundation that the company must be built on. I see so many companies who really are struggling with disability inclusion, but I think it's because they sort of see it as a nice to do, like a good thing for the disability community, and really not for the good of the organization. So with that premise, I always think that organizations need to do like a root cause barrier analysis, which is, it's not easy. It requires kind of an overhaul of looking at every HR process or every aspect of the employee life cycle from sort of beginning to end to look at potential barriers. And sometimes the barriers can be quite simple. I remember early when I started the State Department, there were a lot of job vacancy announcements that had a requirement to like lift 50 pounds and have a
Right.
driver's license. And once we inquired with the hiring manager, like, is this a necessary requirement for this position? They sort of said, no, no, it's not. Removing language from a vacancy announcement can sort of be a simple change, but for people with disabilities looking at the requirements needed for a job, they want to apply for jobs that they feel qualified for. And so they're going to probably not apply for a job that they feel they can't meet all of the requirements. So simple things like really looking at how the vacancy announcements that are available and how they're talking about the jobs and talking about the flexibilities that they could apply to any jobs. I think it then would give, a person with a disability applying just like that little bit of confidence that this is an employer that they could work for, and that employer is going to provide any sort of modifications if needed or provide flexibilities if needed. I would also say that, and this might sound a little tricky, but it's about targeted recruitment for people with disabilities, but it's also about not making disability be sort of a tokenized
Right.
element, right? So saying, hey, our company has all these workplace flexibilities. We really value employees' well being, and having disability be part of those programs, but not separate and apart, right? I don't want employees with disabilities to feel like that they are seen as like special or that accommodations are something that, goes through a very separate process. I think it should just be part and parcel of a company's wellness program or, the workplace flexibilities that they offer to any employee, whether they need it for childcare responsibilities or, caring for their elderly parents or their own well-being. So just having it be part of that holistic approach, those would be like, some main factors. I think also like making sure that disability is not seen as an infrequent or sort of a rare thing. What I mean by that is a lot of times I've talked to people who say, oh, I have diabetes or I
Mhm.
have back pain or, oh, I have carpal tunnel, but I don't have a disability. And I think the frequency with which we talk about all of these things that are part of the human condition and the fact that, everyone is probably going to experience disability or acquire a disability at some point in their life, to make sure that that's part of the disability story, that it's not just seen as people who are deaf, blind, in a wheelchair or people with missing limbs. Like the more I think that we can talk about disability being so pervasive, I think that helps because so many people don't see themselves as disabled, but they are. And I think that they would benefit from a lot of programs that are geared towards disability, but they feel uncomfortable because they haven't grown up with it or it's not something that is, really known or obvious. Yeah,
Right.
your question is going to really make me think after this. I think I'm going to go
Right.
back and wish I had said some other ideas.
Well, it could go on and on and on, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so deep and it's so multifaceted.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
so many different ways to look at it. And you've also mentioned that there's this idea that people with disabilities have to be exceptional to be accepted.
Yeah.
So where do you think this comes from?
Yeah, I imagine it comes, pre-ADA, pre-Americans with Disabilities Act, when, children didn't have the right to go to school with, children without disabilities. And in order to really prove that they, could either go to school or just go out and about in society, I sort of imagine that there had to be, they had to prove that they were able to hang or able or worth being invested in. I know a lot of incredible disability advocates from, the previous generation talk about just not going to school, not because they weren't smart, but just because the schools made up an excuse to say, we can't make our schools accessible and, not accepting no for an answer. And I think it had to take so many activists over the generations to really say, we're here. You can't hide us away anymore in institutions or, at home where you think maybe we belong. We're going to make ourselves really visible. And then through that process, I think in order to keep showing up in spaces, people with disabilities probably felt like they had to be better than others, people without disabilities, so that they could sort of show that all the activism and all of the work and the progress that has been made was worth it. And I think that that's really incredible. And at the same time, it's tragic because I don't want people to always feel like they have to fight just to be in spaces that, yes, now we have the laws, but there still are attitudinal barriers. And I know it's exhausting for people to continue to have to prove their worth in every space that they go in.
Yeah, you've said that people with disabilities are allowed to be average just like everybody else.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's my dream.
but why tell me, why is that statement so radical for some?
I think for a lot of people with disabilities and kids who grew up with a disability, everything that they did, and again, it could be innate, it could be just who they really are, but it also could be people who perceive them to be inspirational or give them a sense of feeling like they're a superhero just for
Right.
existing, like that mentality of like, you're so great for
So
just like,
strong.
yeah,
Andrea,
you're
you're
so
so
strong, you're so
brave.
brave. I think that kind of sticks with you, right? And you internalize that, and then you want to be that sort of model for other people with disabilities. And I'm here to say there is nothing wrong with that. I've struggled with that a lot, and with doing adaptive sports, I do triathlon. I've often said like I want to be inspirational in triathlon because I want to inspire other people to do the sport that I think is such a great sport, especially as an adult. But I don't want people to just think that I'm inspirational for not, for doing things that I think other people could do. And there are so many times where I'm like, I'm not inspirational because I should have trained harder. Or
Right, like, I should stick to my training plan if you only you
that's
knew. Right.
That's right. I know I'm capable of more. And so, like, it's okay for me to be average if I want to just be average at something. If I want to strive and be exceptional, great. I know that I'm capable of that as well, but it probably doesn't have anything to do with my disability. And I don't want others to feel like they always have to be exceptional just because they have a disability.
Okay, so my friend Andrea, if people with disabilities never had to prove their worth again, what would the world look like?
My hope is that it would look like a place where people are comfortable being who they are and their full complexities of identities, and that they're able to grapple with those complexities. And that, no one is shamed for having a disability and no one is made to feel that they don't belong because he is just fully accepting and inclusive of people from all forms of identity. I know that's a very flowery answer, but the hope is that we continue to make the world a more accessible place. And so if, someone has a disability or not, they can walk into any space and feel like they can, do whatever it is to the best of their own ability. And that's good enough as it is.
Beautifully said. So let's do a quick lightning round. So just give the first answer that comes to mind.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. What part of yourself are you finally letting the world see?
Ooh, my humor.
I like that. Okay. What story or belief about yourself did you have to unlearn to step fully into who you are?
That I'm disorganized.
I never would have thought. I never. Okay. Anyway. Okay. What does it cost you to be authentic and
Mm.
why is it worth it?
Well, it should cost me nothing. It should be priceless. But I think shedding of my own perception of myself makes it all worth it.
Good for you. Okay. What boundary have you set that protects your sense of self?
I think the boundary of like I'm a very emotional person, and so always being there for others fully emotionally, it's a wonderful quality, but it also can drain me. So just not feeling like I have to take care of everyone or sort of be there for them always emotionally.
Makes sense. And if you could unmute one truth people are too afraid to say, what would it be?
That people with disabilities can be average, and that's okay.
And that's okay. Last fast question. What keeps you grounded when you feel pressure to perform or fit in?
I think knowing who I am truly at my core and never feeling like I have to be more than that.
Beautiful. Well, Andrea, this conversation has been so powerful. Thank you so much for your time and for your presence. So, if listeners remember just one thing from today's conversation, what do you hope it is?
I hope that they know that there are uh, disciplines and fields of work that can actually really make a change. I think oftentimes change feels really slow and or it feels like we're going backwards, but I do think progress can be incremental. We can go forwards and sideways, and that is okay. But like looking to the field of behavioral economics or universal design or some of these really great disciplines that I think more people are learning about can be, there's a lot of great tools in there that will help people in their work to make things more accessible.
Awesome. And then what has it meant for you to show up as yourself here on Unmute Yourself today?
It's amazing, Jen. I'm just so grateful that you've given me the opportunity to kind of have these thoughts. And authenticity is something I struggle with professionally because I've,
Mhm.
been in some of these workspaces where, as I said earlier, you can't really be who you really are. But I don't think that that's true. And I think it's great to talk about these ideas and then sort of go back and think more about how I could show up more authentically professionally in the future.
That's so cool. I
Yeah,
love that. Yeah, just be yourself, right? And see what
that's
happens
right.
and be
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
So I can imagine there's going to be a lot of folks that would like to connect with you. So how can they uh, connect with you, find you, and support your work?
You I'm always available via LinkedIn if you want to find my page and reach out. I love cold calling and just saying hi like Jen did. It was the best surprise to get somebody just reaching out on LinkedIn, and I think that that can kind of start the conversation. I'm doing a lot of interesting things in 2026 that I don't even know what they are quite yet. So please feel free if I've inspired anything reach out and I'd love to collaborate or think about some interesting ideas together.
Y'all, and this is just a snippet of Andrea's story. So if you ever had the chance to connect with her, I think your mind will be blown. Smart, fascinating, brilliant human. So, again, Andrea, just thank you so much. And thank you to everyone listening and for choosing truth over comfort, alignment over approval, and courage over silence. So, season 3 is about being yourself, especially when visibility grows and silence starts to cost more than speaking up. And remember, I work with leaders navigating high stakes decisions, delivering keynotes that go beyond motivation, and coaching leaders who are ready to move past being stuck in choices they already know they need to make. So if this resonates, let's connect. You'll find details in the show notes. If this episode resonated, please share it, subscribe, and stay with us this season as we explore what it really means to live and lead without muting who we are. Until next time, unmute yourself and be who you already are.